My name is Assata Shakur, and I was born and raised in the United States. I am a descendant of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the Americas as slaves. I spent my early childhood in the racist, segregated South. I later moved to the northern part of the country, where I realized that black people were equally victimized by racism and oppression. I grew up and became a political activist, participating in student struggles, the anti-war movement, and most of all, in the movement for the liberation of African Americans in the United States. I later joined the Black Panther Party, an organization that was targeted by the COINTELPRO program, a program that was set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to eliminate all political opposition to the U.S. government's policies, to destroy the black liberation movement in the United States, to discredit activists, and to eliminate potential leaders. Under the COINTELPRO program, many political activists were harassed, imprisoned, murdered, or otherwise neutralized. As a result of being targeted by COINTELPRO, I, like many other young people, was faced with the threat of prison, underground, exile, or death. The FBI, with the help of local police agencies, systematically fed false accusations and fake news articles to the press, accusing me and other activists of crimes we did not commit. Although in my case the charges were eventually dropped or I was eventually acquitted, the national and local police agencies created a situation where, based on their false accusations against me, any police officer could shoot me on sight. It was not until the Freedom of Information Act was passed in the mid-'70s that we began to see the scope of the United States government's persecution of political activists. At this point, I think that it is important to make one thing very clear. I have advocated, and I still advocate, revolutionary changes in the structure and in the principles that govern the United States. I advocate self-determination for my people and for all oppressed people inside the United States. I advocate an end to capitalist exploitation, the abolition of racist policies, the eradication of sexism, and the elimination of political repression. If that is a crime, then I am totally guilty. To make a long story short, I was captured in New Jersey in 1973 after being shot with both arms held in the air and then shot again from the back. I was left on the ground to die, and when I did not, I was taken to a local hospital where I was threatened, beaten, and tortured. In 1977, I was convicted in a trial that can only be described as a legal lynching. In 1979, I was able to escape with the aid of some of my fellow comrades. I saw this as a necessary step, not only because I was innocent of the charges against me, but because I knew that the racist legal system in the United States, I would receive no justice. I was also afraid that I would be murdered in prison. I later arrived in Cuba, where I am currently living in exile as a political refugee. The New Jersey State Police and other law enforcement officials say they want to see me brought to justice. But I would like to know what they mean by justice. Is torture justice? I was kept in solitary confinement for more than 2 years, mostly in men's prisons. Is that justice? My lawyers were threatened with imprisonment and imprisoned. Is that justice? I I was tried by an all-white jury without even the pretext of impartiality and then sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. Is that justice? Let me emphasize that justice for me is not the issue I am addressing here. It is justice for my people that is at stake. When my people receive justice, I am sure that I will receive it too.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today our guest is Merawi Gerima, who's an activist in Chicago and Washington, D.C. He's also a filmmaker, and he's going to be talking to us and reflecting on Assata Shakur, who just passed away recently in Cuba. Merawi is also one of the leaders of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. So we're going to be talking about black liberation and political repression as well, which makes sense if you're going to be talking about Assata Shakur. And I want to, before we get going, I want to start with giving, on behalf of Fight Back Radio, our condolences to the family and all the loved ones of Assata Shakur. It must have been very difficult between her activism, her incarceration, and her exile. It was hard to be with her throughout her life, and unfortunately now she's gone. So we wanted to give our condolences and our sympathies to all that loved her. And I want to give just a very, very brief background here before we get into this for those that may not be familiar with Assata. Assata Shakur was born on July 16th, 1947 in the borough of Queens in New York City. And she spent her youth primarily in New York and Wilmington, North Carolina, where she was a student of black history and political economy, which along with her activism led her to join the Black Panther Party, where she became one of the main leaders of that organization, that political party in New York City. She was later a member of the Black Liberation Army. Her entire adult life was always a supporter of the right to self-determination for oppressed nations and revolutionary change to end capitalism. Like many leaders of the Black Liberation Movement at the time, she was a victim of a vicious government misinformation campaign. She was arrested and tried multiple times in the early 1970s. Each time except once, she was acquitted, dismissed, or resulted in a hung jury. The one exception happened on May 2nd, 1973, an incident from that time when police in New Jersey pulled her over a car in which she was traveling with two passengers. A gunfight led to the death of one of the passengers and one police officer. Another police officer was wounded at the time. Assata was shot with her hands up at that time and was taken to the hospital where she was mistreated by police who had her under 24/7 guard at the time. And so Assata was convicted in 1977 by an all-white jury in a very high-profile trial. In November 1979, Assata's comrades in the Black Liberation Army helped her break out of the Clinton Correctional Facility. In 1984, Shakur was granted asylum by Fidel Castro and the government of Cuba. The government here, the United States, has called for Assata to be extradited to the United States. Her asylum in Cuba has been a point of controversy for U.S.-Cuban relations, which, needless to say, haven't been very good since the revolution in Cuba. The state of New Jersey, the FBI, and the U.S. Congress and others have all called for Assata's extradition. I wanted to point out, though, that Maxine Waters, who was chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, sent a letter to Fidel Castro to inform him that the Black Caucus had mistakenly voted for her extradition, and that many in the caucus did not support that, including her, and she was the chairperson. In 2005, the FBI classified her as a domestic terrorist. Now, I think this is, from an incident in 1973. So we're talking about, more than 30 years later, they're classifying her as a domestic terrorist and put a reward on her for her capture of $1 million. In 2013, the FBI put her on the most wanted terrorist list. And this is what 2013 people remember, that Barack Obama was president of the United States and Eric Holder was the attorney general. But they also doubled the reward to $2 million. Since her death, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and the state police superintendent Patrick Callahan has said they would vigorously oppose any attempt to repatriate her remains to the United States. So even in her death, she seems to pose a challenge to U.S. capitalism. So we have with us today Merawi Gerima to talk about Assata Shakur and the Black Liberation Movement. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, Merawi.
Thanks for having me back.
Yes. This is your second appearance, and we this is a teaser maybe for the future. But I want to do a third appearance to have you talk about film and the movies and the effect that has on politics in the United States. So consider that an invitation to come back. But yeah, let's talk about Assata Shakur though a little bit here. So. For you growing up, just let me ask you, what did Assata's, did you know that name? How did that impact you as you became a young activist, or even as an old activist? You're not that old now, but as you became a more mature activist, I should say. What impressions do you have of Assata Shakur?
When I was a kid, I just knew her as a face on a book. My parents have a bookstore in Washington, D.C. called Sankofa Video and Books, which sells, books by and about people of African descent. And so Asada's book was always there, and it's just something. It's a common image, in black cities like D.C. And it wasn't until throughout my life, as I got older, it was something that I would put on my list, like somebody I need to read about. Because you always hear people like, yeah, Asada's book. And of course, maybe hearing the stories, that she escaped from prison and, went to Cuba, always interested me. But I didn't get around to reading it until I believe I was fully. I was an adult. I was in grad school, or about to graduate from grad school, finishing up my film that came out in 2020. So it must have been like 2017 or so that I read it and really kind of took time to digest it and I think go through the same process that a lot of people go through when they read that book, which is one of incredible awe, at her, in terms of what she went through, her courage in facing, her particular tribulations. She was nearly killed by New Jersey police, several times, tormented, tortured basically by them
Yeah.
in their captivity, and went through, an insane series of, battles with, U.S. courts. And her aunt, who was her lawyer, they really put up a fight that I think is truly astounding, truly, awe-inspiring. Once again, for people who, even like me at that time, I wasn't organizing. I was just a regular individualist, artist. Like so many of us are taught to be. This is before, I guess, my kind of politicization. But it was those are the things that stand out to me is the relentlessness of the state, in getting after her and trying to basically destroy her and her relentless fight back. You know what I mean? Time after time after time after time until she finally became free. It truly is like it's legendary. It's the stuff of legends, and that's why she's so big today. And to be honest, is why like these New Jersey, to this day, they hate it. The police, the state, elected officials, not just New Jersey, across the United States, cannot wrap their minds around why she's such a mythical figure in the Black community and beyond the Black community. You know what I mean? Like, you know, we talk a lot about how basically every rally, you know what I mean, almost every meeting, that people have in the movement and even outside the movement, either starts or ends with, her poetry, her words, her uh you know, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. And it is the almost universal aspect of the movement at this point. And she's so held up because she went toe to toe with this system that everybody suffers under and everybody's fighting against. And she lived to tell the tale. You know what I mean? And and I think that she has such a chokehold on her own narrative, that the multi-billion dollar, narrative machine of the US, empire is unable to wrest control over, you know what I mean, from her. And so she has been able to dominate the telling of her own story. And we all, are able to hear from her own words, what she went through. And the U.S. has no ability to turn us against her, you know what I mean? And to stem the tide of her influence, on the movement. And not only her, of course, she's so big because she came out of a movement, and she was practicing in this movement from her work in the Black Panther Party to the BLA. She was organizing, what I mean, for years and years and years. And it's the fact that she came out of that movement, um, and escaped, the U.S.'s best attempts to, destroy her and that movement, and then came out later to write the story of that, that whole, struggle. It's not her as an individual; it's her as a symbol of a movement that people are holding on to this day.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, Asada to me was, an extraordinary person who was part of a movement that was during extraordinary times in some ways in the late 60s and early 1970s. But I want to go back. I mean, it seems to me that her upbringing was there's people that had influence on her that are important, like for all of us, I think. But it's not like that atypical. She was born in New York City. She grew up largely in Wilmington, North Carolina, was kind of back and forth, and then went to New York. And that's a common travel for Black people in New York to Wilmington or to North Carolina. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe what it might have been like for. I know your father was involved in doing research and doing a film about the Wilmington 10, which talks about that city during that time. But what would it have been like for her growing up, in North Carolina and New York City during that time, and what influences might have she seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only that she grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. She grew up in, the Jim Crow South, She grew up in Wilmington at a time when the KKK was out, in full effect and very much in the open. And she talks about this, in detail in her book, how she kind of had to learn, just through, uh, you know, um, with nobody having to explain it to her, how, Jim Crow worked and operated in the South. She grew up stepping off the sidewalk for white people. You know what I mean? She grew up, not looking white people in the eye. You know what I mean? She grew up kind of holding on to that, incredible, kind of rage that Black people have to stomach, in the South. Um, And under that constant threat of, just horrific terror that they used to dominate, Black people in the South. And so that was her experience growing up, with her grandmother down south, and I think that that's another aspect that stood out to me when I first read her book is, as she starts the book talking about how she's like, locked up after she's been shot up and caught, by New Jersey police. And as like her, as she's like fading, as she's kind of like, kind of passing in and out of consciousness, she starts going to memories of her grandmother down south, you know what I mean, from her childhood, which kind of gives you an idea of how, fundamental that was to her, development, as a revolutionary or into a revolutionary. And so, um, yeah, I think that, you know, like you said, the uh, South Carolina, North Carolina, to DC and New York pipeline is just it's well, it's the Great Migration pipeline from south to north. And so when she, went back to New York City, she also experienced, racism, but just under, a different form, white people claiming that, the North is not racist, yet, basically, the same level of racist police violence, the same type of economic violence that Black people suffer, inability to get, dignified jobs, well-paying jobs, all those kinds of things. It was just kind of racism under new garb that she, experienced growing up in New York City. And in many ways, it was, I think, harder on her because she didn't have the community, of her grandmother, which was, such a tight network of, Black people in Wilmington, North Carolina, where everybody was supported. But in New York, she talks about how everybody's just basically on her own, I mean, on their own. And she went through a lot in New York City. And yeah, as a young woman, as a Black person, all kinds of, racist and sexual violence, and I think that, those experiences had a lot to do with, I mean, obviously, they were the fuel for her, kind of further development um, and
Yeah.
search for a revolutionary path. The last and one of the most important things to mention about her upbringing is that Wilmington, North Carolina, that's the site of the 1898 Wilmington Massacre. Now, of course, after the Civil War, the period of Black Reconstruction resulted in an incredible proliferation of Black political power throughout the South. Over 2,000 Black people were elected to office, from local positions all the way up to Congress. And this was eventually betrayed by the North when they pulled the troops out the South, and that making Black people vulnerable to just incredible white terror, and backlash, and they drowned Reconstruction in blood, through the 70s, 80s. And Wilmington lasted all the way up into the 90s. It was unique in that it was able to essentially, last that long. And it was the biggest city in North Carolina. There was a Black middle class developing, and Black people in coalition with white people progressive white people had that city politically on lock until the Klan and, whatever, the racist white folks conspired and pulled off this coup, and they massacred hundreds of Black people. There were bodies floating through the what's that, the Cape Fear River down there, and thousands of Black people were run out of the city, and Jim Crow terror as law was installed by force into the city, and that's the shadow of racist Klan terror that she inherited. What I mean? That's where she grew up at. Her grandparents would have experienced that, would have been there for that. Her grandmother, who she was very close to. And so to me, there's no surprise, like her life trajectory is completely logical as a response, to that type of white terror, and that's what these folks today crying about. Why she's such a law, a respected person don't understand. That she is the most logical response by Black people to the conditions that they're subjected to here in the United States. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, these experiences, later, I mean, she goes on, she studies Marxism and revolution, but it's motivated by all these things in her early life. And that, she, joins the Black Panther Party and became one of the main leaders in New York City. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe about the Black Panther Party? What's your perception of what that organization was and what it might have been in New York City at that time, and what kinds of things she might have been doing, or how that might have influenced her, and how do you think about the party, the Black Panther Party?
Yeah, I mean, the party was for her what it was for, a lot of other Black folks. It was a vehicle for people who wanted to fight back, against, you know, uh, racist, political, economic domination, by, you know, in the United States. And so, for her, she was organizing. She was, doing what we know a lot of Black folks were doing, particularly in New York and on the West Coast as well. Breakfast programs, organizing around health campaigns, and things like that. And she, um, I think she was always a discerning customer, when it came to organizing. She throughout her book, she's constantly kind of, chewing through, or talking through the different types of, ideas that she was chewing through as she worked through it, because, the Black Panther Party was figuring it out. It was building a bridge as it walked it, and they were trying to navigate incredibly complex territory, and some of the turns they made were incorrect. And she was, I think, you know, um, yeah, consistent in, kind of trying to apply, like a objective analysis of what was going on, and trying to discern for herself which was the correct path to take. And so I think she ran up against, some of the things that we know in terms of, kind of male chauvinism in the party, and kind of, you know, some other, maybe more dogmatic kind of aspects. She talks about how, there was kind of a rejection of, certain, like cultural aspects of Pan-Africanism, Um, but I think at the end of the day, I think, the party for her was an incredibly rich, experience that developed her into a, razor sharp, revolutionary, able to analyze, the world for really what it was, able to see that our domination, is not on the basis solely of us being Black, but we got disconnected. But what I was saying was essentially that she joined the Black Panther Party because they were about the action. They were organizing very seriously and struggling against, the racist uh, uh, government and police forces arrayed around them. And she wanted to be involved in that. And she learned through the course of struggle, all the important lessons that, later pushed her into the most revolutionary aspects of what we know about her, and to, kind of direct armed struggle against, the United States, and, through her work in the Black Liberation Army. And so to me, I think it's, you cannot separate Assata's experience in the Black Panther Party, in the breakfast programs, doing police watches, political education and community self-defense work that she was doing, from her later trajectory, into what we now know her as this worldwide symbol against U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think that's some of the Black Panther Party's success, as you mentioned as well. I mean, they had these programs that were survival programs, they called them, and like breakfast programs and different things, different, healthcare things that they provided for the community. And the welfare state picked up on some of those things, I think, in part to undercut the Black Panthers, because they were bringing political lessons as well as survival from within the community. And now Trump's taken that survival stuff away, and we're seeing cutbacks on breakfast programs and health care for poor people, no matter what nationality they are, what race they are.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you about, Assata also, to me, seemed to be consistent throughout her adult life in calling for self-determination or power for oppressed nations and peoples, and she was consistent about calling for an end to capitalism. In your view, why do you think this is important, and how do they fit together?
Yeah, I mean, she talked. She was one of the first people I heard. I guess early on in my development. Alongside like Malcolm X talking about connecting Black struggle in the United States to African struggles on the continent. He talked about the Congo a whole lot and how basically these European countries were just violating that the Congo, bombing the Congo, exploiting the Congo, doing all these things. And Asada comes along later to talk about how important the Angolan revolution was to Black people in the United States, at a time when Cuba was following up with in deeds, what I mean, sending tens of thousands of troops to go fight in Angola against these racist white mercenaries from South Africa and everywhere else. And so she was, I mean, she also talked about the Vietnam War, what I mean, and how important it was for Black people, to see the Vietnam War, in the same way that, we see the basically U.S. war against Black people here in the U.S. Essentially, just another arm, another tentacle of this beast that we all fight. She was consistently connecting the dots between people's struggles across the planet against U.S. imperialism to, Black people's struggle against the same thing back home. And it's I guess all accumulate you know um, it all comes together in her escape finally from the U.S. to Cuba.
Yeah.
Cuba is this worldwide symbol of just staunch, relentless, courageous, and in many ways victorious struggle against U.S. imperialism right in the U.S.'s backyard. They were, because they had their own revolution, because they overthrew the U.S. backed, dictator Batista, through you know, um, this, nationwide organizing struggle, alongside Che and Fidel in the mountains. They were able to have a revolution and create an environment in which she could escape to, and they were able to offer her, sanctuary from the U.S., kind of control or what's it called when they bring you back, extradition.
Yeah.
If Cuba hadn't had their revolution, she wouldn't have been able to go there. They would have been able to pluck her right up out of there, and bring her right on back. But because they did, and because Fidel, was, consistent and had the power of this revolution behind them, they were able to offer her sanctuary. And she died there in a poetic way. She lived to be an old woman, and she died of, the health complications, with old age. I'm sure it didn't help that she had to be underground, you know, uh, because, when Obama in 2013 doubled the bounty on her head and put her on the most wanted list. She had to go deeper underground. I was in Cuba in 2018, and they were telling me you used to be able to see her around, different places in Havana and elsewhere. But after Obama's, Eric Holder's announcement that she was on the, most wanted list, you never basically saw her, out there anymore.
Yeah, no, it's
Uh,
terrible.
but the point, but
Go
the
ahead.
point is, she lived a long life and passed away in Cuba. You know what I mean? Outside the reach of the U.S. They never got her, and they hate that. And now they're trying to fight. Bring, if anybody attempted to repatriate her remains to be buried in the U.S., they're, without anybody asking, they've, declared that they would be against it. Vigorously against, any type of thing like that.
It's incredible. It really is. I want to talk to you a little bit also about the repression that she faced before she was convicted. And the disinformation I mentioned, the COINTELPRO was this program that was unknown at the time, but was uncovered in the years afterwards by the Church Committee. But that basically was that they were trying to. The FBI and others were doing this disinformation about Assata. Can you talk a little bit about the repression that she faced here, and also other activists, not just her? Was and what are we is that gone? Is that a thing of the past, or are we still facing repression like that now?
No, the so they were assassinating people. They were assassinating black people in the movement, and even outside, they were essentially it was a mass terror, campaign through subversive means to destroy, all movements, for democracy in the United States, all revolutionary movements in the United States, COINTELPRO, they were intent on showing, division amongst these organizations, inside of these organizations. I grew up on stories. My mother would be telling me about how they would write letters, from, one person to another saying, so and so, you know, you know, had sex with your partner or whatever, you know what I mean? So and so is cheating on so and so, like stupid petty things that seem legitimate enough because they put a lot of craft into deception, that would instigate, all kinds of you know, division and violence, between organizations. And they had spies, moles, everybody, because there's always opportunists, even black folks, or of any color, in any movement who can be paid off. And they took full advantage of that, They assassinated Fred Hampton, and they would have assassinated her if they had the chance. But yeah, they essentially went on a mass campaign, to after she was captured to essentially convict her. Before she was convicted, they called her the mother hen of the Black Liberation Movement, to paint her, in this picture of a terrorist and, all these things. And so they put out all the stops, what I mean, when it came to her and also the rest of the movement. But also COINTELPRO, was just a development on a long history of, you know, surveillance programs against liberation movements in the United States. They go in phases and they build on each other. They have this index where they, label people, who they essentially track people who need to be arrested immediately in the case of certain types of emergencies, and these indices change names. And as they're found out, essentially by the public, they then have to change names again to make them, acceptable to the new law, or to be hidden, under the, from the public again. And it's just a cat and mouse game between the public and, these agencies, particularly the FBI. Um, and so COINTELPRO was just a particularly vicious development in that course of, U.S. surveillance against, these populations in upswing, against the population in general. But certainly when people start to fight back, these tools are at the ready, and right now they're only expanding. They're releasing information every day on new programs, new technology that ICE, for example, is spending tens of billions of dollars on to be able to hack into any phone, that they get a hold of, or even remotely, you know what I mean? Now they have technology to be able to, through apps like WhatsApp, just kind of infiltrate anybody's phone and see whatever is on there. And so it's a constant cat and mouse game, between the movement and the government.
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you about, I mean, you're a leader in the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And that's an organization that dates back actually to this time, and particularly the fight to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. But looking at Assata's case, she felt that she could never get justice in the United States, and her conviction may prove that. But do there's she also went broader than that and talked about how the criminal justice system, and your organization has done this too, how the criminal justice system does not give justice to Black people. What are your views on that? Could you dig down on that a little bit more? And then also, what kinds of things are you and your organization doing to try to change that?
I I believe that there are almost there are very few places that you can go to so clearly see, the fact of um, uh, how the justice system is constructed to, essentially um, prohibit any, justice being, granted to Black people. Maybe here's a better way to say it. There's, courtrooms in the United States are the best places to see how racist, the justice system is, and how, um, essentially anytime a Black person gets justice in court, it's a miraculous event. It's a rare event. So I'm thinking specifically about, the case of Anthony Gay in Chicago, or in Illinois, that we were supporting. Anthony Gay did 22 years of solitary confinement, over some petty, charge earlier on in his life. And he was only supposed to do a couple of years, but they kept adding time as punishment because he started cutting himself. And, he was having a really deep kind of, mental health issues in response to the conditions that he was forced into, in these disgusting, horrific Illinois prisons. And they added more years until finally he had, basically, 22 years of solitary confinement straight. And then he got out. He became a jailhouse lawyer and got himself out. And then within a couple of years, they basically trumped up charges, were fighting to basically get him back in, on a trumped up gun charge. And so we were in court as they were trying to fight to push him back into prison as he was defending himself. He was one of, I think he made history in Illinois, where basically he was, or maybe even the country, he was one of the first people to be able to argue pro se without a lawyer, to himself to a hung jury, in Illinois, and was able to beat the prosecutors in this, kind of first round. And then they came back around, moved him to a whiter part of Illinois, and basically we're able to get a conviction. And we used to go to these courtrooms and seeing him just surrounded by white people, surrounded by these big, chunky, milk-fed white officers who you could tell, want nothing better than the opportunity to jump on this man, and these judges arrayed across, the judge and everybody else arrayed across the courtroom, and how he had essentially no chance at justice even though he was innocent. He ended up dying in prison. They put him away. And then he ended up. It turned out he had cancer. They could have found it earlier, but they didn't. And then basically they gave him, whatever they call, whatever type of release. The day he died. He didn't even make it to the hospital. He died in transit to the hospital. And so to me, like reading Assata talking about, her, fighting in court, trying to get some semblance of justice, there's no way she did, what I mean? Like this, you don't have to convince Black people of that, that fact that there was no chance that she would get any type of justice, against these charges against her in the US. And that's why Black people hold her up. That's why Black people hold her up because most people don't make it out of that equation. Once the system has you in their grasp and they're about to throw you in prison for whatever reason, they can do it. But she managed to make it so that they could. She managed to escape, against their all their resources, all their whatever. She managed to tell a different story, and that's why she's an aspirational symbol, for all people across the planet, but especially Black people who are fighting back against this justice system on a regular basis, day in, day out. The National Alliance is a massive organization because these conditions are not rare. They're common. They are the rule, not the exception. From state, we have 30 chapters fighting against racist police violence and wrongful convictions. You know what I'm saying? Fighting to get people out who have been, essentially railroaded by, this national injustice system, and they're usually Black and brown folks, and everybody gets it, without much explaining.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So, but let me ask you about let me dig into this a little bit. So, your fight, in the spirit of Assata for sure, against wrongful convictions and police violence. How do you do that? What kinds of things does the Alliance? How do you do this campaign?
Mass approach. That's what we do. That's how we fight. That's our greatest weapon is our numbers. And so we do everything we can to leverage our numbers to organize people into mass mobilizations against the movement, mass activity. I'm sorry, not against the movement, mass activity against the system. And so in Chicago, Chicago is the capital of police torture and wrongful convictions. And so they just had a rally last week, where they combined the immigrant rights movement and the movement against wrongful convictions in a mass rally against Eileen Burke, who's the state's attorney, who's lording over this system of wrongful conviction currently in Chicago. And like my coach here in Chicago always says, Jasmine Smith, she'll always say pressure busts pipes. And it's true. The more people we bring out there on a more consistent basis, on more focused targets, the more it becomes, untenable to continue that type of work. And our brother Kevin Jackson, who was locked up, they tried to lock him up for 40 some years. He ended up doing 20 some years, and he recently was able to, get his freedom in this long struggle in the courts. And of course, we assisted in the streets, by bringing as much attention to his case as we possibly could until he finally got free. He was just on the news the other day talking about, basically how he was railroaded by a detective who said to him that he knew he was innocent, but he was going to lock him up anyway. Detective not John Burge, um,
Forberg, I think it was, right?
yeah, Brian P. Forberg, So that's how we fight back, and we're doing that here in DC as well, bringing awareness to these cases. There are these brothers who were jumped on by the police, and try to defend themselves and each other, and now they're looking at, felonies, but they don't have a case. They're dropping them left and right, and we're trying to bring mass attention and mass activity to this case and many other in DC, and that's what the Alliance does.
Yeah, no, I see that, and I see that here in Chicago for sure. I mean, every march for that the Arab community has for Palestine. There's a speaker from the Alliance. There's a people there from the Alliance showing support. More recently, the fights for immigrant rights, which people, a lot of the immigrant community here is afraid, but some come out, and many more supporters, and the Alliance is always there organizing, mobilizing people. There's a immigrant rights work team here. And then in DC too, as you said, we had KB on here recently, and if you didn't listen to that episode, listeners, go back. They were one of talking about the occupation of DC by troops and such like that, and the resistance that I think you were a part of and helping lead along with KB. So that's that's important. That's the kind of stuff we need to do. I wanted to ask you. I want to go back to this question though about solidarity internationally, and you mentioned Cuba earlier, and maybe you could talk about that again. But the U.S. imperialism oppresses nations, both the Black community here in the United States, Chicano community, and others, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, but but there's also all over the world. It oppresses different people, and The alliance, I think, and you have had an internationalist perspective. I think Assata, when she decided to go to Cuba, showed that as well. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of international solidarity of oppressed peoples and in the fight against, fight for self-determination?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can tie it back into the last question, fighting back against wrongful convictions. It's not just us fighting against, Eileen Burke, the state's attorney. It's also, Arab American Action Network, at AAAN. They, are an organization in Chicago that has a long-standing campaign, against these officers who, uh, beat a boy nearly to death, and also uh, allowed this woman to go free after, drunk driving, striking, and killing a Palestinian man, in Illinois. And Eileen Burke, the state's attorney, one of the first things she did in office when she came into office last year was to drop the charges on the one of the officers that they were able to get charged for nearly beating the boy to death. And so we work basically on in everything that we do in the Chicago Alliance. We work in lockstep with, organizations like AAAN and USPCN, the U.S. Palestinian Community Network, um, Filipino organizations like, Anak Bayan, and, Chicano Latino organizations, everything that goes on in Chicago, the Black Liberation Movement, the Immigrant Rights Movement, the Palestinian Liberation Movement, and the Filipino Liberation Movement, and many more, work essentially in lockstep, you know what I mean, in coalition together, against, all of our shared, enemies. And that's just a local example of, this broader fight against U.S. imperialism, because Eileen Burke is she's just a local representative of U.S. imperialism, you know, um, in the way that we face it on a day-to-day basis in Chicago, but around the world, these liberation movements represent, whole nations, in this kind of life and death struggle, you know what I mean, with the U.S. empire. If you look at what's happening in Palestine right now, they're in this total, revolutionary moment, going blow for blow with, Israel and, the U.S. empire. Um, the same thing in the Philippines, a US backed dictator, that they've toppled dictator after dictator, and the US keeps putting another one up, putting another one up. And at the same time, their movement, in the Philippines cannot be defeated. It is nationwide, it's global, you know what I mean? And here in the US, but the Black Liberation Movement, is going at, right now, rising to meet the moment, of this new threat by this kind of racist and reactionary Trump agenda, as it attacks black cities throughout the US, Um, so all these movements working, working together and increasing their coordination, increasing their ability to work in lockstep. That's the goal. And at the end of the day, we're just building on, what Assata has done, what Assata was doing, here in the US and through her escape to Cuba, or just kind of building on those connections. The last thing I'll say about this, is a special shout out to my brother Hatem Abudeya. Um, not too long ago, he lost his daughter, Maiset Abudeya, but her middle name was Assata. And Hatem is a longtime organizer, in Chicago in the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And, from the get-go, the Palestinian Liberation Movement and the Black Liberation Movement, especially in Chicago, has been, kindred movements. And so for them to have named their daughter, after Asada already shows you the level of, integration of these two movements. And also, just to me is also a, they pass so close to together to so close to each other's you know it's just another kind of symbolic aspect of all these things as as history moves along, it's just these really kind of beautiful symbols, just kind of, these poetic moments keep coming to us, as we continue to struggle.
Yeah, no, that's good. And yes, I mean, Hatem Abadea has been actually a past guest on Fight Back Radio as well, talking about Palestine, and encourage people to go back and listen to that. And of course, we give our sympathies to him and his family over their daughter's death. That was tragic. And you're right. That he named his daughter. Him and his wife named their daughter Assata. And so that, yeah, absolutely. Also, I want to just mention. To give for past episodes, the last episode that Merawi Gerima was on was talking about this issue as well. You went in depth. It was Joe Biden was president of the United States at the time, but I'd encourage people to scroll back and listen to this. Merawi talked about the importance of for the Black Liberation Support Movement to be supporting what was going on, to oppose the genocide that was happening at that time, and to stand with the people of Palestine. And it was, I mean, it was whatever. I mean, we were able to give you more time on it at that time, but I think it's an important issue. Could you talk a little bit about, just looking at Assata Shakur again? What would her legacy, and what revolutionaries today should be learning from her and taking from her to go forward?
I mean, I feel like, you know, I feel like we've said it already, you know what I mean? I think that to me, the most important thing about her is that, she put it into practice. She wasn't just talking. She wrote a book, after she had, gone through an extraordinary course of events, in, this day in, day out struggle, for Black liberation. And to me, she was a woman of action, you know, and that comes through in every word that she writes. Um, she's not afraid to tussle with ideas, of course, she goes toe to toe with some of the wrong ideas, of her time and some that, echoed through to today. But in, you know, consistently, she's focusing on things that happen, things that she did, things that other people did, and you know, and I think that that's a lesson to us in this movement right now, which I think often can be caught up in, the ideas um, that are swirling around in this day. But for us, in particular, I'm speaking from my experience here in Washington, D.C., where we're fighting to build a coalition against the Trump agenda on the basis of unity of action, not of ideas. We see, folks, getting caught up in, what Frank Chapman calls these ideological snags, we see them getting caught up in the struggle over ideas rather than, you know, working out these ideas through practice, working their way towards correct ideas through action, rather than fighting back at, against the threat right now. Sometimes we allow ourselves to get caught up in conversations around the best slogan, the best title, the best, you know, whatever, letting perfection get in the way of progress day in and day out. And you see the opposite in places that have successful movements and are mounting, incredibly successful campaigns against the Trump agenda, where they're able to cut through all that, noise and go straight to, we're not going to agree on. There's a lot of things we're not going to agree on. But one thing we can agree on is that we need to fight back against Trump. And here's what we propose. We want to be out there on this day at this location. Can you get down with that? Period. You know what I mean? To me, even saying that, I'm like, I feel like that's the type of time that Asada is on, or was on consistently throughout her life. It's like, okay, great. Are you down to do this thing now? And to me, I think uh, that is an important takeaway. I think, um, I could just speak for myself,
Yeah,
consistently
no.
pushing myself to not get caught up in the conversations around ideas, but to get caught up in the organizing of activity.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that that's a good point. I mean, it's important, I think, that we discuss ideas, but that not get in the way of our actions.
Yeah, because some discussions um, will mobilize people, and some discussions will demobilize people. You know what I mean? And we want to be involved in discussions, to mobilize people. Um, and it's easy to get caught up, to the other side.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, because it is a little bit of a different time right now. I mean, the last time you were on Fight Back Radio, Joe Biden was president of the United States, as I said, and you know, your call for unity was similar then, to what you're saying now. But Trump's been president for whatever a minute now, not quite a year, and the things have changed. In terms of could you talk a little bit about what Trump has instituted different than Biden? I mean, it's in the paper, it's every day. It's shocking some of the things that are going on, but has that changed how you do your organizing on the ground, or your strategy or your tactics? Or is it pretty much just the same thing with a new guy?
Yeah, I mean the strategy hasn't changed. We still our goal is to build the biggest, broadest, deepest coalition, that has the capacity and energy to defeat this occupation of DC and the Trump agenda more broadly, locally and nationally. Um, but it's true that, like just recently, as you know, Trump called in all these generals to a meeting in the US to essentially, identify, the movements against him as, local, what is it, the enemy within. And so this is an escalation, in rhetoric. And of course, like Frank has previously said, it's a announcement of their, actual intent to escalate. And we had to take it deadly serious, But I think just because you realize that you have less time on a test that you're taking doesn't necessarily mean that the answers change and the way to get to the answers change. You may, take new, paths to, get through them, in a different way. But essentially, you still have to do the same work to arrive at those same answers. And for us, that means that we have to continue, we focus harder, on making sure that we uh, can build this coalition up, to making sure that, to be less wasteful, to be more efficient, and to be more effective and productive in our growth, in our outreach, in our selection of targets, and in the activities that we do, as organizations and as a coalition. And so, for us, the metric, uh, hasn't changed, though the field, has gotten more intense. But we know the answer to the question. We know how to win. You unite the many to defeat the few, and no matter how much money they'll put into the military, no matter how much money they'll put into ICE, no matter how many student loans they forget, for these jokers who are joining ICE left and right, they'll never have anywhere near as close to the numbers that we will have, that we have. They brought out a couple thousand, National Guard troops to DC, which sounds like a scary number until you just kind of juxtapose it to the fact that DC has 700,000 people in it. You know what I mean? All they can do with their, paltry numbers is terrorize people, select a few here and there, grab a few, kidnap a few, make it as public, as possible to scare people. But the antidote to that fear is organizing, coming together, and feeling our collective strength. And that's why we take a mass approach in everything that we do, because we know it's the best weapon that we have. and the one that they'll never have.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And we're winding down. Our time's running out here a little bit, and I wanted to give you a chance to, if there's anything that we haven't covered here, or anything that you wanted to say, or if there's anything you wanted to plug, any or anything you want to call on our Fight Back Radio listeners to do. Now is a good time to do that.
I mean, well, the first most important thing is the fact that, the National Alliance is having a conference in November where we will all be coming together, you know what I mean? All 30 chapters and all our affiliates, we'll be coming together to talk shop, to talk about the things that we're doing and the things that need to be done. It's going to be an incredible event. It's going to be in Chicago. I can't wait to get back out there. And it's going to be this November. Uh, the November 14th, 15th, and 16th, that weekend. And so hopefully we can drop the link for people to register in the show notes because we want as many people to come out there as possible. It's going to be incredible. Don't forget, the National Alliance was, you know, um, Angela Davis is one of the founders of this organization. It came out of the movement to free her and all political prisoners. So we got some heavy hitters in this movement, in this organization, and especially now when kind of a national formation, which has the ability to call national actions, and coordinate, at such a scale is more critical than ever before. This is the organization to get down with. So check us out. Um, Link in show notes.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put the link in the show notes. I will definitely be there. Frank Chapman will be there. Merawi Gerima will be there, and many others. So hopefully we'll see all of you there as well.
The last thing I want to say is, Assata was a poet, and one that there's a photo of Hatem's daughter, Maïsa, next to a line from one of her poems, which is, "A wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be broken down." And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind as we hurtle towards this wall that has, so many things about it that seem scary, but at the end of the day, it's just a wall, you know what I mean? And it's not even fully built yet. They're scrambling, trying to make fetch happen, but they can be defeated, and we fully intend to do so. Yeah,
All right. Well, thank you for being our guest on Fight Back Radio.
yeah, for sure. Is it okay if I just read the thing, her chant, to close out this? So this is Asada's poem that everybody reads at every action, which is wonderful way to close this out. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
We must love each other and support each other.
We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
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 Okay, so let me start this conclusion by thanking our production team, which is usually the last thing I do at the end of each episode, but especially Lane Dorsey and others who said we should do something for Assata Shakur. We should make note of her passing and what she's done. And during this times of Trump doing crazy stuff on a daily basis, and especially this midway blitz that's going on in my city, that seemed a little difficult to do, but I'm glad we did it, and brought back lots of memories of those times when Assata was active in the United States, and we had martyrs at that time and repression of people in the Black Liberation Movement. There were debates going on as to what self-determination was and the relationship between the working class and the Black Liberation Movement and other liberation movements. And I guess that goes on today as well, but bringing back some of those debates and reflections I think is good, especially with Assata Shakur. I think recognizing, her bravery, as I saw Frank Chapman did, and her consistency, as Merawi said. And Merawi, I think, was the perfect guest for this. Reflecting on how she and how Assata's life affected and inspired him to be the revolutionary activist that he is today. I want to remind folks again about the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression's conference, November 14th, 15th, and 16th here in Chicago at the Chicago Teachers Union Hall. And you should register for that right now, which would be at conference spelled out NAARPR.org, and you can go there and register for the National Alliance's conference, and I encourage everybody here to do exactly that. Also, it's in the spirit of Assata Shakur. You need to join the resistance at whatever level you can, at whatever, I don't know who you are. You're a Fight Back Radio listener, so I like you already. But whatever you can do, some of the attacks on immigration that's going on, every day it's something more crazy. They're just scooping people up here in Chicago. They said they were going to get the worst of the worst, and they're just scooping up anybody who speaks Spanish or has brown skin, or even in some cases people that they've raided apartments in the black community as well. So it is crazy. There's no warrants. There's no nothing. Just masked men scooping up, from the federal government, scooping up people off the streets, and really, causing distress to their families. We've had parades here in Chicago of ICE and other people in military gear, through tourist areas of downtown. I think, sometimes I think it's just to disrupt the economy. Also, I just, before we go off, I should mention, we just started a government shutdown, which doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, which will, disrupt the lives of lots of people, and especially federal employees who work for the government. Trump has already done everything he can to take away the rights of people that work for our federal government, who, not, ICE or border agents, but people who do things like make sure our water is clean, our air is clean, that take care of our veterans in VA hospitals. All of these people, our national parks, which, this time of year I think people like to go out and enjoy, but I can go on, but it's just terrible what he's been doing with all that. And also, as I'm recording this now, is Trump's new proposal around Palestine and Gaza is being discussed and debated, and I'm not sure how this is going to play out with what's going on in Palestine and the genocide. But we are with the people of Palestine. We have, through our interviews over the last 2 years and even before that, through the life of Fight Back Radio, that we believe in self-determination for the Palestinian people, and the Israeli apartheid government, the Israeli-U.S. genocide is something we have to resist at all, however we can. But anyways, so in the spirit of Assata Shakur, I want to thank our Fight Back Radio production team of Shane Tremley, Dodd McColgan, Lane Dorsey, and Caetano Silvero. I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.